So let's say that in the middle of a workday, you decide to clear off your desk and have another sip of coffee and just kind of let your mind wander. It's almost like you're taking out a blank sheet of paper. And on this paper, as you let your mind wander, you start from some arbitrary place and you start drawing. You don't have any set plan, no predetermined direction that you want to go. You're just kind of drawing shapes. Starts out like triangles. You're letting your mind go, and it's going where it wants to go. As you start to warm up to the idea, you see on the page of your mind patterns that start to emerge. It starts to become easier and easier. For some reason, you feel like this comes more naturally to you. You draw these shapes because it seems like they are calling for you to be drawn. You draw because these shapes seem to be coming from some part of you, and as you start to fill up the page and run out of blank space, you're coming to realize that you're drawing yourself in some way. You start to reach the end and you put on the final touches. And as you survey the page, as you look it over, you realize something, that for the past few minutes you've been drawing this version of yourself. You have a canvas that's you. The Ten Commandments are the epitome of the law of God. They're incredibly important to our faith as Christians and to the whole story of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim ways of thinking. They're everywhere in our art, in our stained glass. And they're also in many of our public places, in front of courthouses, serving to remind us that justice is from God and that these Ten Commandments serve as the foundation of our justice and morality. When Moses gives us the Ten Commandments, he gives us the law of God. It must have been an incredible sight. Mount Sinai, the place where God lives, and Moses coming down from that mountain, still bathed in the light of the face of God, carrying in his hands the Ten Commandments, the pillars of how the people of Israel were to be. Gathered in front of that mountain, thousands of people who were recently freed from bondage would hear the word of the Lord in a new and powerful way. They would hear the expectations that God had of them. But the beginning of that law is God telling us who God is. God telling us God's nature in a real way. This God who created the universe. This God that we see on display when we look at vital images from the Hubble telescope of distant stars and nebula. The vastness of a universe that we can't even comprehend. That's who God is. That's why this first commandment starts the way it does. I am the Lord your God. You can have no other gods before me. Because who else in heaven or on earth could have created the things that we see? Who could have created clouds of dust that are measured in light years? Who else could have created the vastness of the earth in its mountain grandeur or its calm, soothing beaches? Who else could have created the fury of nature that we see in high waves that crash on the bow of sturdy ships? How could we comprehend this God? When we retreat to our quiet places, we realize that the first commandment is about telling us that there is nothing and no one like God. The majesty of the universe is too great. The history of God's salvation is too great for us to attribute this to anyone else. Reminds me of the beginning of that classic movie, It's a Wonderful Life. We survey the town of Bedford Falls and we hear the prayers of the people going up to heaven for George Bailey. And the filmmakers cut to this celestial scene where they imagine that God is speaking with some angels. And the way they imagine the scene is that galaxies light up with every syllable they speak. It's their intent to show how great God is on a cosmic scale. But the first commandment reminds us that even this falls short. Nothing can capture the grandeur, the majesty, the power of God. God is not one being among others. God isn't even a galaxy among others. God is infinitely, qualitatively different from us. And that's where the second commandment comes in. Because eventually we stop taking the opportunity to draw ourselves. You move from that abstract notion, the one that surprises you when it turns out that you are the way you are. Instead, you turn to the conventional things. You start to draw the things that you already knew were important to you. Maybe that's money. Maybe for some of us it's relationships or sex. For some of us it's going to be getting ahead at work or in life. Maybe relaxing. Maybe it's important to us to be noticed or to avoid getting noticed. Maybe it's important to us that we're the funniest or the best looking or the richest or the smartest person in any given room. Who knows? There are a million things that matter to us that shouldn't be terribly surprising. We get this idea in the Bible that idolatry is a violent and passionate thing. We see these images of the prophet Elijah driving out and destroying the prophets of Baal. That's what idolatry looked like in Bible times. But if we took the chance today to look into the chapels that are inside our hearts, if we took a chance and we opened up the door to the holy places that are inside of us, we would walk down that aisle and see what we expected to see, wouldn't we? Wouldn't you see a cross and an open Bible and lit flames? Well, the second commandment tells us it's too possible, it's too tempting for us to instead walk up to that altar and see the idol of ourselves in front of that cross. It's too tempting for us to look at this holy place and instead see the things we want to see blessings of money, to be focused on sex or relationships, to open the Bible and find our own ambition laying in there. Turn the page and find an excuse to be lazy, or to try to focus on the cross but find ourselves blocking our view. To see the things that we wish others would see instead of looking at God. The first two commandments give us another vision, a vision of opening the door to our heart's chapel and seeing on that altar no drawing of ourselves, no drawing of anything that we've put above the worship of God. And what we see on that altar instead is a piece of paper, marked only by those bled-through Sharpie marks of the things drawn on top of it. This is our version of God, the one who stands underneath everything, making everything possible. Even the vision of ourselves must happen on top of God's grace. This is the God that we worship, the one that we see in the Scripture, who says that no one is like him, and that we can make nothing like him. These commandments help us to understand who God is in the most powerful way. When we understand the chapel of our hearts right, we don't see ourselves on the altar. We turn and we find ourselves worshiping in the congregation. That's God's plan for us, and the epitome of God's law, now as always.